I want to start with the call to end the study of Tanakh. I'm going to be a little bit sarcastic here. Okay. Aside from all the reasons why you shouldn't be studying Tanakh, starting from the times of the Haskalah, you're not supposed to be studying Tanakh. We have to stop people from studying Tanakh. You know why?
Why?
Because if you study Tanakh, well, the people who study Tanakh end up becoming religious fanatics, Kahanists, or as Reb Lichtenstein at the Gush put it, it's just not our derech. You'll want to become like a Shimshon or Yiftach, which, well, I know, but so the problem is if you want to be like Shimshon Yiftach, uh, despite that it says that Shimshon Yiftach did what they did in L'Shem Shemaim, it says that God's spirit came upon them and they smote the enemy, which I would think is a divine endorsement, the prophetic endorsement for the deeds. Apparently, that's not our derech. So I think you all should stop now soon, because you don't want to become one of those extremists who maybe their opinions informed uh, by Tanakh. Okay, but seriously though, we should study Tanakh. Uh, you know that Tisha B'Av is next week, correct? Yeah, please. If it's a chair, you're allowed to sit on it. There's none of the chairs here are reserved for anybody. Okay. We're also online, so that which you say may be recorded and used against you in a court of law. Hold on a second. We got a question coming in. Yes, there are many who interpret that statement of the sages to mean you should study less Tanakh. But I was saying sarcastically, you should study less Tanakh because you might end up having your opinions informed by Tanakh, and those opinions are incorrect nowadays. Let's start with the story of the Beis Hamikdash. It used to be the tabernacle stood in Shiloh, and it has the distinction, as pointed out by Chazal and others, that it was never despoiled. What does that mean? There was a lot of gold in the tabernacle. Did any Gentile conqueror ever come and take the treasures of the tabernacle in Shiloh? Apparently not. What was it made out of? It was made out of gold. It was made out of wood boards covered in gold. Yeah, they managed to take the Aron, but they ultimately had to give it back. And they didn't take that from the tabernacle. Remember? They took it. It was the Jews put it in danger, and they were using it almost like a talisman, like the Rambam points out. So that was taken from them. But the menorah was never, what? They never had the opportunity. The enemy never conquered Shiloh and was able to take the tabernacle. What they destroyed, when they took the Aron, they destroyed the tabernacle. What was left of it? The Kohanim and Levim evacuated all the components that were made in the wilderness, including the golden boards and the silver sockets as the base, and all the kalim and the mizbeach. Those were evacuated. The original bronze altar, which is saying made by Moses, made by Salah actually. But either way, the mosaic artifacts survived. The stone altar that was there in the courtyard was destroyed, and the stone outer shell of the tabernacle was destroyed by the Philistines. They destroyed the city, but the tabernacle did not fall into the hands of the enemy. The sin that's described, what, need something?
No plates and cups?
In the kitchen?
Oh, where?
On the dish rack? Okay. The sin that kept coming back, who knows Sefer Shoftim? What was the sin that they used to do in the olden days? The sin was idolatry. Okay, it wasn't the majority, but there were people who always were worshiping idols. And most of the time, the idol of choice was various forms of the Baal. As you can find out by looking in the history books or going to the museum, the Baal, based on its name, means the fertility god, the various gods of fertility. And sometimes types of rain, we've inherited this from the Canaanites, is the thing that causes the land to become fertile. So worship of the Baal involved Gilur Rayos. Okay, the Kadesh and the Kadeshot. And Molech, which was another form of idolatry back then, involved Shlichus Damim. So when you were involved in the Kanani Avodah Zarah, you got the big three all in one. You got Avodah Zarah, Shlichus Damim, and Gilur Rayos. So that was a big problem in the times of the judges. And we went through this cycle. God would rebuke the people, and they get oppressed by foreigners. And then a natural leader we call a shofet would arise and save them, right? And eventually, this brought about the destruction of the tabernacle. That was a punishment. What was the thing that basically broke the straw that broke the camel's back? 300 and something years, 369 years. Thank you. The tabernacle stood at Shiloh. Oh, no, thank you. Okay. 300, there will be no drunkenness in the base matters. Okay. 369 years it stood there. What was the straw that broke the camel's back? Here for the glass was the corruption of the priesthood. So the tabernacle was destroyed. Do we know when in history that happened? Is there a date on the calendar like Tisha B'Av commemorates the destruction of the Korban and Shilo, or the taking of the Ark of the Covenant. I'm sure there's some place you could find it. It's in Seder Olam, maybe somewhere like that, that actually has the date of the year when it happened. But is there a national day of mourning for such an event? Why not? It didn't matter? Oh, it mattered big time. So, you think it was a compromise after the Egel? I don't know. That sounds a little bit too sophisticated for me to even begin to think about. I wasn't prepared for such an idea, but it wasn't so bad in the eyes of the sages because, like I said, the original tabernacle did not fall into the hands of the enemy, and the ark was saved. But the ark was eventually it was taken, but was eventually given back. And you guys notice, I remember showing this to my son, when the temple stood, the first temple, things weren't always hunky-dory. About 40 years after the construction of the first temple, stood for 410 years according to our tradition, already foreign conquerors came and defiled the temple, the first temple. That's described in the Book of Kings and the Book of Chronicles. It's described as being done by the first pharaoh who actually has a name in Tanakh. It used to be, until the times of Shlomo Melech, whenever it refers to a king of Egypt, he's always called invariably what? Pharaoh, which is just his title. It's not his personal name. We know that hundreds of pharaohs ruled in Egypt throughout, the classical times, and even before Avraham Avinu. That's what they called their king. So it's always called Paro, and it leads to some confusion. People think that there was some Paronim, these pharaohs who ruled for hundreds of years, starting with the time of Yosef all the way down to Yetzias Mitzrayim. If you take all your midrashim literally and you combine all of them, you get one pharaoh who lived for 400 years, which is impossible and also against everything we know about, but it doesn't really matter. That's not pshat. The first pharaoh mentioned by name is Shishak, who was a generation after Solomon, and he came and you know what he did? It says he took away all the Otzros Beis Hashem and all the Otzros Beis Hamel. He took away all the gold and all the silver and all the treasures that Solomon had put in the temple. So that's pretty shocking for many people. You understand, like, you think that the opulence, the grandeur, the glory, the riches that were in the first temple, so that stayed with the temple the entire time. But that's incorrect. It was all taken away. As I'll say, this is sort of a big rebuke. That was all that the Israelites had taken out of Egypt. Remember, they basically drained Egypt, took away all of Egypt's wealth. So now the Egyptians came and took it back. And what for? Because the people had strayed. There was some idolatry, but more than that, the people were now worshiping God in places other than the temple. They were offering sacrifice beyond the temple. That started 5 years after Solomon died. Okay? 5 years into his son's reign, that's when the Egyptians came and conquered the place. So saying, wait a minute, it's almost a miracle. Because of their repentance, they were saved. They were supposed to be utterly destroyed. That could have been the Khurban. But they repented on the eve of the Egyptian conquest. And the Navi came and told them, Shemaiah Navi came and told them, okay, there's been a reprieve. You're just going to have to really get it from the Egyptians, and you're going to lose a lot. But Jerusalem will not be destroyed. You won't be taken to Gullus. The temple will not be destroyed. But it was despoiled. And it says that from then on, the kings of Yehuda, they had to recoup themselves. They took taxes. They had to conquer other countries. They eventually replenished their own treasuries and the temple treasury. Except, you know what happened? It's described elsewhere in Tanakh that a generation later, the king of Yehuda, whose name was Asa, decided to take all those treasures again. It says not just his own treasury, once again, the temple treasury, and he sent it as a bribe to Ben-Hadad, the king of Aram. Why? And this is something that's counted very much against, but it says until that point, he was a tzaddik. Everything was said good about this king until middle of his reign. He decided he's going to bribe the Aramean king, who once upon a time, there was no king of Aram. In Shlomo Melech's time, the Arameans were a vassal state. They had no king. And eventually, because we went down, they went up. So what happened with these Arameans? King Asa bribed them to come and attack the king of the 10 tribes. Get the 10 tribes off my back. So attack my fellow Israelites. That's pretty bad. And he basically drained the temple. And we have other instances throughout history where it was either a foreign conqueror came and took everything that was in the Beis Hamikdash, or a Judean king himself decided, look, for political expediency, pragmatism, I'm going to take everything I have and send it to foreigners. That's what, by the way, happened in King Achaz's time. He also saw, well, we're doing pretty well. We need to once again get the 10 tribes off our back, and the Arameans, 10 tribes and Arameans gather against us. So who did he bribe? The Assyrian emperor. He basically invited the Assyrians to come and take over Eretz Israel. And he bribed them to do it. And he made the Beis Hamikdash lose all its money. So we see here that This was always part of the Tochakla. If you read the Tochakla, it doesn't always have to come true in one shot. You guys know about the Tochakla, I hope. What does the Beis Hamikdash need the money for? You could ask that last week. It says that they had a tabernacle, right? Moshe Rabbeinu's time, they built a tabernacle. Everything was all exactly as they needed, right? All the donations came in. And then it says that the soldiers who came back from Midian donated some like 16,750 shkalim of gold to the tabernacle. What did they need that for? If the tabernacle already has money and it's already made, what could they do to improve it? And the answer is they're always doing stuff to improve the tabernacle and the Beis Hamikdash. It's a mitzvah. If the Beis Hamikdash is made out of stone, there are other people, okay, then it's a mitzvah to coat the whole thing in gold. And it also pays for sacrifices to try to make it nice. And, even though they made a paroches and they made screens, eventually the tabernacle at Shiloh didn't have the simple screen which stood in front of the doorway of the tabernacle. It was a permanent structure, and it actually had great doors. It says that Shmuel Navi's job as a youngster was, as a Levi, his job was to open the doors of the tabernacle in the morning. Where to get those doors? What were those doors made out of? So they were always a temple treasury to try to make the temple nicer, or just for its general upkeep. Okay, and it says, what is it? There were people in the times of Dvorah. They were making what? New curtains for the temple. What? Yeah, that's later Second Temple times. But you understand when they had these gigantic curtains, how big was the curtain in the second Beis Hamikdash? Basically, it's a room that's about 40 amos tall. Two great rooms, one on top of the other, with a height of 40 amos and a width, quite a lot, like 20 or whatever it was. So you had a gigantic curtain that separated that room down the middle. They replaced that curtain every few years. Okay, the Tcheles and Argama until Ashani. It wasn't just one parochas made by Betzal and Eliyav. It says he was the rokem. He was the guy who embroidered it. That was the first time in history. They kept making new ones, and it took a lot of kohanim to dunk it in the mikveh and everything like that. This is something that the temple had, I guess, a large expenditure. We always lived pieces of the Tochakla throughout our history. We had the temple despoiled before we had foreign conquerors come. There was always something happening, but we never got the complete version, which was complete destruction of the temple and complete exile. And it happened by the time Yirmiyahu was a young man. This is what we read about last 2 weeks ago in the Haftarah. Yirmiyahu was called to the prophecy about 41 years before the destruction. And he had a message basically saying that the big one is coming. Not just foreign conquerors going to come, maybe cause us a lot of trouble. Even, they were destroying cities. In Chizkiyahu Melech's time, cities were destroyed. A lot of Jews went into exile. But they said he was a messianic figure. A lot of things became much better afterwards. That could have been the end. Yirmiyahu Navi was telling them this whole city is going to be destroyed. God says a mushal, like this plate, just like flip the plate over and then wash it off. That's going to be Jerusalem. Everything there, gone. Okay? All the treasures gone, the temple gone. Do you know that people couldn't believe this was going to happen? What was the theological argument against the destruction of the temple? A theological argument. Well, it's God's house. How can you destroy God's house? God will not allow some Russia to come to destroy his own house. It cannot be. And not only that, if that's the case, the very presence of the temple in our midst is protecting us. Once upon a time in Shmuel Navi's time, he was telling him, go look what happened in Shiloh. Look what happened in Shiloh. So they were busy thinking that's because the Jewish people went out to war and took the Ark of the Covenant out of the temple. We're going to keep the Ark of the Covenant in the temple. That's going to protect us. We're going to keep it. We're not going to make the same mistake they did and treat the Ark like an idol that we bring it out to war, it will protect us somehow. And what happened? Anybody know the end of the story? What happened? Yirmiyahu Navi's telling the temple's going to be destroyed. The temple's going to be destroyed. You all got taken to Golos. What happened? Well, oh yeah, they threw him into a pit. They were plotting to kill him. Yeah, but what happened with the temple? It was destroyed. And what were the sins back then? Someone should know. Trivia from your Gemara says that once again the averas back then were, although it certainly wasn't the majority, were avodah zarah, shvichus dam, and gila rayos. In Ezra's time, this lesson had been learned. The people in Ezra's time took upon themselves an oath. We are going to keep the Torah. No more of this avodah zarah business. We're actually going to come good from Jews. And even though during the Second Temple times, there were also the down times when foreign conquerors came and took everything. When Yehuda Maccabi showed up in the Beis Hamikdash, what was there? Nothing, right? Absolutely nothing. They didn't have menorah anymore. They had to build everything from scratch. But at the end of Second Temple times, like Chazal say, all the Jews were basically what you and I would call Orthodox, good from Torah keeping Orthodox Jews. So they perhaps rightfully, they didn't have a Navi around giving them a warning that something bad was happening. So they could have thought that, okay, so now we're in the clear. Not only that, the Second Temple stood longer than the First Temple. According to Seder Olam, 420 years as opposed to 410. According to the history books and the Balamor and others who follow the history books, it was 586 years. So they saw that the Second Temple, which they thought was the redemptive temple, and soon the Messiah is going to come. This is the beginning of the end. They were thinking that it's going to be okay. And they're all keeping the Torah. There was no idolatry among the Jewish people. Yeah, if you have a guy who becomes a Hellenist or something, so he leaves. You know, they were completely separate. Oh, you had some Sadducees, but at least Sadducees did not worship idols. Sadducees did not engage in arousal. As a matter of fact, they were probably more machmir because they follow literally what's in the Torah a lot of times. You know, even though they're
between back then people not believing that the temple would be destroyed, and people now
believing that the state,
in their magical Judaism, right, that it's not going to happen.
Oh, it could very well happen. They're forgetting.
They're perfectly content with believing, oh, it's in my head or it's somewhere else, or the temple is irrelevant to our Judaism.
Yes. So and they think that perhaps their state as it is cannot be destroyed. Rabbi Mati Berger was telling people the Tochah could still happen. It's an eternal thing. Hey, you have a question about that?
It's just that the only difference is that we were never good at the beginning of this country that it was ever it's never like we actually earned it back.
Oh, maybe we did. I don't know. I'm not keeping score for God. There are many Jews who are committed. At least they got over the whole Sinas Chinam thing. What destroyed the Second Temple was Sinas Chinam. That means you had a class of people who were actively working against the rest of Am Yisrael.
Like we're in a firing on.
Yeah, that was a big problem. That was an act of Sinas Chinam. Nowadays, the Sinas Chinam has become too great that people are saying it's worth trying to destroy our civilization, our country as it is, because it's not the way we want it to be. Okay, that's a very big problem, and that was the problem second base of English times. That's ultimately what led to it. The destruction of the Second Temple, like what happened with the Jews in the desert. God basically said, "You want to stay in the Midbar and not go into Eretz Yisrael? Fine, I'll give you what you want." It was less than a punishment, more of a God saying, "Fine, you want to be like that? Be like that." So too, when things in Second Temple era got to a point where Jews are just fighting and destroying their own country themselves, so God basically said, "Fine, that you'll get that," and that's what's happening now, and that's why Tisha B'Av is so relevant, and that's why it's so scary. You don't have the temple built in your days; it's as though the temple was destroyed in your days.
I just got done doing Melachim
Yes.
4 months ago, and I found it very sad and depressing because I've seen a lot of parallels between then and today.
Yes.
And it seems that this, going and doing sacrifices outside of the Beit HaMikdash is like a form of liberalism. Like, oh, like God loves this, it's okay. We can
It's
just
called
do whatever.
egalitarianism. It's rampant egalitarianism.
Yeah.
That's what Yeravam basically stood for. Yeravam basically said, you can worship anywhere, and anybody could be a Kohen, anybody could be a Levi. These restrictive rules that say that the sacrifice has to be here according to these rules run by these families, was totally wrong. And he even said there's precedent. Before Solomon built the temple, you could offer sacrifice anywhere. Before we had this idea of the temple, anybody could offer sacrifice.
It's the same thing with Korach.
Yeah, it was a Korach idea. But here's the irony. Korach had the egalitarian idea. It was Korach's descendant, Shmuel Navi, who basically initiated this whole period, which lasted for, according to Seder Olam once again, 57 years. People were doing like Korach, and it had God's endorsement. He was the Navi. Shmuel Navi initiated the period in Jewish history when sacrifice could be offered anywhere by anyone. You didn't need a Kohen. You didn't need a Levi. You didn't need even to wear a special uniform. You could build your own backyard altar, and God was pleased with that sacrifice. And who participated in such things? Shmuel Navi, Shaul Melech, David Melech, Mr. I want to build a temple, also had his own personal altar built in Jerusalem, done things his way, not the way God had commanded. So when Yeravam did, we did, only 2 generations after Shmuel Navi, Yeravam was basically saying, I'm bringing things back to the way it was. It used to be, this was the true Judaism, the true egalitarian Judaism. And by the way, he had many listeners. Many people like that message. That was a very big problem. That was the problem of first Beis Hamikdash times, that in the Northern Kingdom, their egalitarianism meant that there's a rival to the temple and don't let people go to the temple. And in the Southern Kingdom, it was that even though people could have gone to the Beis Hamikdash, they chose not to. They built their altars in Bezek and Hebron and other places because they didn't need to go. And Gezer and places like that, they didn't need to go, and that was a problem.
There's also the, you're talking about the bribes.
Yeah.
I was reading about this as well. And I was like, oh my gosh, they're trying to make a deal with these terrorists. They're trying to bribe these guys. In my mind, it's like the same thing. You're trying to bribe these foreign entities
who were trying to hurt Am Yisrael.
That's right. So like how are we going to overcome and eradicate this type of flawed thinking when it is so embedded and so old in our Masorah?
It's not a Masorah. We have to understand that.
I know it's not Masorah, but to the other people, it basically is. We have to be. Yeah.
That's the Gemara in Sanhedrin. That's what Chazal say. The acts of Yeravam, that was their Masorah. To them, that was a Masorah. That's why we study the Tanakh now in the light of the sages. So if you understand these lessons, if it was written in Tanakh, it means it is an eternal lesson that always parallels us today. There's a lot of history that's not written there. It says that there were certain judges. The judges between Gideon and Yiftach are glossed over, right? It says they saved Israel. There's nothing. Look, it was 50 years or so. Still, it was major history that there's no real eternal lesson. So the Navi did not write it down. There's no Jews happened, and there were wars, and the Jews were saved. But you don't need to know it. Why? Because no eternal lesson. So that's why we're studying this now. And that's why I began with saying, I think it's almost ironic. I can understand why nowadays there are many people opposed to the study of Tanakh. I'll say almost jokingly like that rabbi who said, I want people to stop wearing tchelis because it makes them want to go on Har Bayis. Okay? Avera goreres avera. You wear tchelis, next thing you know, you're going to want to do more mitzvahs. So that brings us to another idea I wanted to say. What?
How are we going to overcome it? How are we
by studying. By getting the message out, telling people study Tanakh and see what is in there. And that's an example over here of someone who doesn't understand this. Your brother would love this one. Okay, so I'm dedicating this to him and also to the person I'm responding to. I'm not going to name him by name, but I'm going to try getting this sent to him. Who didn't understand something. He was wondering, he says, he is worried about those who say, militarily wise, Am Yisrael should just strike at its enemies, utterly destroy their enemies. Imagine things could go back 10 years, okay? 10 years, relatively peaceful time. I don't know. When do we have peace? But there was a state of Jewish being since the Hitnat Kutin, since that's the Gaza disengagement. Wow, it's before your time. And before the retreat from Lebanon, things were relatively better at Am Yisrael. We've had intifadas. So is that an acceptable state that, God punished him. I wanted to say that there was someone I remember telling him when the attacks from Gaza started after the Kut, someone I know, I don't know if he's more accurately described as a moron or an idiot, but he basically was saying that the state whereby, that means the situation, not the physical state, the state whereby we have to periodically endure occasional rocket attacks. Just, it's like rain, like Dr. England says. It's like the weather forecast is going to rain today. How many random rockets shot out of Gaza will we sustain today, right? How many random shootings on roads or stabbings in malls will we endure this week, right? You just have to get used to it. That's the state. Otherwise, if you want to fight back, it would result in a much bigger war that we might not win. So we have to develop a certain tolerance for a constant trickle of attacks, right? Sounds almost ridiculous, right? Yeah, well, that's what they're saying. Be good. Okay, they're basically telling us develop a skin, and this is what Ehud Barak and others told people when they started playing. Hey, your tactic backfired. Now we're being attacked from the area from which you retreated. Now they're attacking us from there. So they told them get used to it. In Hebrew, they told them get used to it. So do we have to get used to this? Is this an acceptable thing? So this fellow who's writing today said, well, the choice is either fight back. Maybe we should just get used to it. Because I don't want to be chas v'shalom like one of those warmongers or those hawks like a Ben Gvir chas v'shalom. By the way, I'm not endorsing him. I'm just saying he's wondering maybe we should just take it.
No,
yeah, no.
Don't want to do anything.
So hold on. Well,
you established deterrence.
Okay. Instead of talking about
it's like a bad
yeah.
child.
So he says people like you are just these muscle-bound right-wing extremists living in the settlements and gun-toting, and you're not thinking about the political implications and the consequences and things like that. Okay, that's what he would say. But hold on, what you have to use as an argument against these people is to show them what would the sages say, what would Chazal say. Bring a precedent from Chazal. Bring a precedent from the Bible. Bring something. Does anybody have anything? So I'll show you something here. Okay. Or as I summed it up here, a state of affairs whereby the Jewish people are not completely sovereign and free from terror and paying tribute is completely unacceptable. I'll say that. Okay. We want to be sovereign. We want to be free from, terror and having to, give up our money every now and then. There are no acceptable levels of oppression or random missile and terror attacks or piracy. So how do we know this? We open up once again the book of Judges. What does it say in the book of Judges? Anybody know? Where do I find this? Oh, good thing. It's all over there. I'm going to share this on the screen. Yosef, if you could look with me over here. We can, I have to, still not technologically advanced enough to do this. Here. Everybody see this? This is the book of Judges. If you want, you have a copy over here in this Tanakh, okay, and other Tanakhs around here. It says that the Jewish people basically had a cycle. What was the cycle? They didn't do what was right in God's eyes, so God would deliver them into the hands of their enemies. What does it say there? Let's see the first time it says here. Okay, go to the second parak. Okay. Oh, careful. It says here's the second parak, the 13th verse. It says that what they did wrong. They abandoned God and they worshipped the Baal and the Ashtaroth, right? Now, which time in history does this indicate? This is the introduction to the book of Judges, which basically tells you the general cycle. Okay, it doesn't tell you just once. This happened many times. And then what does it say? God was angry with Israel, and he put them into the hands of the spoilers, who despoiled them. Basically, come and take everything you have. He delivered them into the hands of their enemies, misaviv, the ones all around. They couldn't stand up against their enemies. That means they could not mount a counterattack. The enemies took over. Whatever they would try to do, God's hand would be against them for bad. Jewish people not doing good, so they basically get it they take it on the chin. This is part of God's promise, part of the covenant. But then, and God would raise up prophets. They'd repent, and judges who would save them. It says here, the first time this happened was in Othniel ben Kenaz's time. This is the third parak, the seventh pasuk. What does it say? They forgot God. Why have do without believing with Asheroth? This time they're worshiping the Baalim, not Ashtaroth, but Asheroth. What are Asheroth? What is our trees? Yeah. Okay. He delivered them into the hands of Kushan Rishasayim, which is a Hebrew name making fun of him. His real name was something probably Aramaic, but Kushan Rishasayim means doubly wicked. Okay, it's like Antiochus Epimanes. Okay, not Epiphanes, Epimanes. Ha ha ha. Get it? You know, the Greek Epiphanes means the magnificent, from the word epiphany, and Epimanes means the Meshuggah, from maniac. Okay, so that's what the Jews call him. So it's a joke in Greek. Okay, so it says here that God raised up a hero for them. That was Othniel ben Kenaz. So it says, they served Kushan Rishathaim 8 years. What does it mean that the Jews served him? It means they carried his tray and offered him breakfast. When it says that one people serves another, it means they're enslaved to the other people. It means they pay tribute. Okay? That's what Am Yisrael for 8 years after the death of Joshua was
taxes?
What?
As in taxes?
Yeah, well, heavy bird tax. It doesn't mean like, oh, instead of paying 10% to a Jewish king into the temple, I'm going to give 10% to the king of Aram Naharaim and he'll be off my back. Or a decent like place in America where you could technically pay whatever it is, you're 70% to the IRS, and then then you don't have to worry anymore, right?
More like 20 to 30, but
well, whatever.
But everyone pays it. It's not like it's
okay. But you understand, this people in, let's say, the free states are still able to live, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Yeah.
But that was not the case. It's just pay taxes to this guy. It means pay crushing taxes. Okay, it means paying taxes that are, humiliating. Okay, so it involves humiliation also. Okay, an oppressed people. So that wasn't good. That existed for 8 years. It also says next after Othniel died, who was the oppressor? The oppressor was here the Moabites. Eglu Melech Moav. What does it say here? Moav got together Ammonites. Usually Moav and Ammon work together, and Amalek. Oh yeah, that's the worst. Wayachet Israel. They smote Israel. What does it mean they smote Israel? It means they killed a lot of people. And it says, Yeshua Irat Tamarim. They took over the area of Jericho, right over the Jordan River. And this time they paid tribute and were oppressed by Eglon for 18 years until Ehud assassinated him, and the Jews were able to fight back. Okay, so you see, it got a little bit worse. The second time around is worse. Then the Canaanites, this is about now 100 years after Joshua's time, the Canaanites are going to regroup. Yes, many of them have been destroyed, especially in the south. There's no more Canaanites. But in the north and the Galilee, the Canaanites are regrouping. Now it's not just city-states. There's a new confederation of Canaan. Right? Why? Well, how are the Canaanites able to regroup? Because it says that the Jews in the north, the Israelites in the north, did they get rid of the Canaan? Was there Canaanite genocide, by the way, perpetrated by the Jewish people or the Israelites ever? The Torah says you have to kill all of them. Was there ever one that was perpetrated by the Jewish people? And the answer is no. Okay? The Navi says that was their mistake. That mitzvah, get rid of Amalek, get rid of the Canaanites, was never fulfilled. Why? Because why are they worshiping God? We didn't do it, and we ended up paying the price. They drove out the Bnei Yehuda, conquered and drove out many of the Canaanites, and also the Bnei Yehuda's neighbors. And in Binyamin also, there's very few Canaanites. There were Canaanite cities here and there. The city of Jerusalem itself was a Yevusi city in the middle of everything Israelite. Right?
What is the thought process?
Well, the same thing today.
I'm willing to risk going
Everything.
out to the mall and my wife and kids getting stabbed at by some, terrorist, but we
Because you're
can't
Jewish.
get rid of them.
Rahmanim Baishanim Gulmi Chasadim. It's our natural tendency. We are kind, compassionate, and merciful. You know, like and also bashful. Yes. So it's our midos working against us. What was it?
Like love to get rid of them. Love to give that power interest.
No. You don't have half enough Jews. People like to say that it's America. The Europeans, they don't let Israel do it. There are not enough good Jews who need to do what it takes. Either way, there was no Canaanite genocide. We're putting our own soldiers on trial for things they didn't do. It's like, fine, find some terrorists, let the terrorists go, call them at their house. Hey, can you accuse a Jewish soldier of something? Oh yeah, sure. I suffered injury because we're Ishmaelites and we engage in sodomy and we do stuff like that. So I'll blame my injuries on the Jewish people, like Jewish men. Talking about people from around here.
Did they not think that there was a possibility that
they did it themselves?
Could have been gay.
Yeah. Yes. It's beyond us. Okay, fine. By the way, let's get off of that for a minute. So it says here in the Canaanim raised their heads again. That's Barak and Sisera was the bad guy. It says Yavin Melech Canaan. Ehud was dead. Yavin king of Canaan. By the way, what's significant about his title? In Joshua's time, there are many Canaanim. And if you're king of some place, you're known as king of a certain city-state, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Shechem, the king of Hebron, etc. There's a 31 kings. There's no king of Canaan. Why? Because Canaan's all broken up. But in this case, now the Canaanim, it's 100 years later, he lives in Chatzor, says he ruled in Chatzor, but he's basically king of all the Canaanim right now. That's how they were able to regroup themselves. Sar Tzivos Sisera, he lived in Charosh Hagoyim. And he oppressed Israel with might for 20 years. Now the repression went on for how long? Not 8 years, not 18 years, not just taxes. He was actually doing something bad to the Jewish people. Okay, it's not clear what, but this was worse than what preceded Othniel's rise, and worse than what preceded Ehud's rise. You understand?
Why was it not that?
Well, it is. It's right here in the Navi. They don't have to tell you. So it says, the Torah here it doesn't say, but then you read Deborah's song. Deborah alludes to what Jewish people had to endure before Barak and Deborah had their miraculous victory over these remaining Canaanites. What does it say? Anybody know the song? Here, let's see here. Bimei Yael chadalu arachoth. Yael, who's the one who eventually killed Sisera, that woman, right? From the tent. She pegged him in the head, literally. I used the word literally correctly, I think, there. Because to peg someone means to aim properly. But she literally took a peg and put it into his head. Okay? So, good example. So, it says here, in the 10 times of Shangar ben Anath, he was the preceding judge, and the days of Yael, you couldn't go in the street, basically. Couldn't go on the main highway to get anywhere. You had to take always circuitous routes. You had to create a Ramallah bypass road and a Huwara bypass road, because if you went anywhere where they were going, they'd kill you. Yeah. Someone put out a book in Rabbi Victor Miller's name, but he made a critical mistake here. He's saying in the olden days, it was hard to go to Machon Shilo to serve God because the Plishtim would cause you problems. No, not Plishtim. People always, I said a few books, they say the people caused problems at the times judges were the Plishtim. No, we're talking about Canaanim here. This is about a few hundred years before the rise of the Plishtim. I know, but Canaanim were natives. Canaanim were natives. Canaanim were the opposite of Plishtim. Okay, this is before the rise of the Plishtim on the coastal areas. This is Canaanim in the interior. Okay, so yeah, they made it. Chadlu Prazon B'Yisrael Chadelu. Prazon Yisrael was no longer Prazon, being able to live in a nice open city without walls. The Prazim are the unwalled cities. No more unwalled cities. Ad Shakamti Devra Shakamti Aim B'Yisrael. Okay, so she continues over here. You could see other descriptions. How the Danites basically had to live in houseboats. They couldn't even live on their own territory. Described here. She says about how bad it was before this victory and how good it was afterwards. Who came after Devorah? Says the land was quiet for 40 years, right? And then it comes Gideon. 7 years of Midianite oppression. Okay, Midian's hand was stronger against Israel. It's because the Midianites, the Jewish people, had to make not just circuitous routes to just get around the Goyim who would kill you if you went into their areas. What did they have to do here? They made Minharoth in the Harim and Minharoth in Mitzadot. What's Minharoth in the Harim? Yes, you have to tunnel. We have to build tunnels. Can you imagine? You can't just drive south of Jerusalem to get to the Gush. Now you have to build a tunnel. Why? Because you left the whole Canaanite or I guess Midianite or Amalekite city. So you got to build yourself a tunnel. And even if you build a tunnel on that road, they're still going to attack you right before you get to Jerusalem, right? The tunnel road with the Gushes. Basically, they have a checkpoint there. And it happens with quite frequently. Just this week, there's always something because cars get stuck there. That's where they attack, right? The Jewish people had to build tunnels to get under the mountains back in Gideon's days. Sound familiar? And they also had to go into hiding in caves. They were hiding in caves from them. Sounds like Maccabean times. Okay? You actually had to hide in caves and mitzadot. Basically, they fortified themselves. They're safe rooms. Okay, things got worse. You got to hide underground. So either the bad guys make tunnels so they could get weapons and they attack you from them, and then you have to hide in the tunnel. You have to basically lock yourself into. Make yourself a little cave within the mountain and build a fort around it. That's how you used to live. Is that a way to live? A Masada, basically. No, and that was pretty bad. And not only that, it got even worse. If Israel would plant Midianites and Amalekites and Bnei Kedem, that means other Easterners, basically random Arabs, would come against them. They encamped against them. They brought armies against them. They destroyed all the crops of the land. Oh, really? They burned the fields. This sounds more like today, right? Just burn everything. Until you get to Gaza, because Gaza was basically the edge of Jewish settlement. Was Gaza a Jewish city? Yes, it was Jewish. It was Jewish in Joshua's time, and it became Jewish again in King David's time, right? How do you keep losing? Because backsliding, not keeping the Torah. They didn't leave any food for Israel. No sheep, no oxen, not even donkeys. Okay, why I'd say was talking about food. So there's food that you grow from the ground. Then there's sheep and oxen, the type of thing that Jews eat, and then even donkeys. You couldn't even resort to eating a donkey. It says, famine's so bad, so you're gonna have to eat the non-kosher animals. No, not even donkeys left. Okay. They'd come like locusts. It's a plague of locusts. The Midianites, the Amalekites, and these random Arabs come, but they kedem, they take everything, sweep everything away like locusts. Vayavov haaretz l'shachata, they came upon land to destroy it, to utterly waste land. This is much worse than it was in Deborah's time. Vayidal Yisrael ma'od mipnei Midian. Israel became very poor because of Midian. See, this is the lowest we've gotten. Why zaku v'nei Israel el Hashem? So they cried out to God. You know what happened? So why zaku v'nei Israel Hashem al dot Midian vayishlach Hashem ish navio b'nei Israel. They cried out. So God sent the prophet and told him, "Okay, here's what you have to do. I saved you before. You have to repent." And the Navi came, and classically, like the Rambam describes, he found a stand-in for a king and appointed Gideon ben Yoash. Told him, "You're a Gibor Chayil. Who am I? I'm just a nothing, a King David type, just a nothing. No, you're somebody." And eventually, the Am Yisrael even realized you basically check all the boxes of being a king. Do you want to just make it official? Moses' response: no. Even though he was pretty much like in the Maimonidean model, I was trying to tell some people last week. You know, the word Isha has two meanings, and if we translate it to English, we don't understand what the word Isha means. What does the word Isha mean? We discussed this before. The word Isha, what does it mean? Isha, it means a woman, right? It means a woman to you, right? And sometimes Isha means a wife. That's if you're thinking in English. But if you think in Hebrew, it means a wife. And sometimes the Isha is Pnuya. She is available, so she is just a woman. She's a single woman. But in Hebrew, the main word Isha actually means wife. Okay? Why is it significant? Because we saw before, the Gemara says, Malkat Sheva was not, anybody who says she was an Isha is wrong. She was Malchut Sheva. Wait a minute, it says the Queen of Sheba. They say anybody who says she's a woman was wrong. She was the Malchus of Sheba. So they're thinking in English, or they're thinking in Yiddish, and they understand what the Gemara is saying. The Gemara is saying she wasn't some king's wife, like a typical, most queens in history have been, queen by right of what? Married to the king. No, if you say that she was just some king's wife, you're mistaken. She was a queen regnant. She ruled in her own right. She wasn't queen because her husband was king. Okay, like the Queen of England was previously. Okay, nowadays there's a queen in England. Does the Queen of England, she inherit that title? Does she have any power? No, she's just the king's wife. So she's called queen. But her mother-in-law was queen, not because her husband was king. Understand? That's what the Gemara is saying. So you have to think in Hebrew, the word Isha. When you hear the word Melech, we think king. And that's what's used. Yes, it does mean that in let's say in halacha. But there's a difference between, let's say, monarch and leader. Okay, king, in the way the Rambam uses it, it's used in Tanakh, means the leader who has no one above him. The Rabbi says that's the definition of a nasi equals king, someone who has the highest rank and no one is above him except God. It doesn't mean he's a monarch. You understand? So sometimes king means monarch, sometimes it means highest ruler, but it's not what you and I would call a king. So we're thinking too much. We usually, unfortunately, think when we hear the halachic term king, we think a monarch. But the way the Rambam defines it in Hilchos, Malachim, the way he describes a Yehoshua, he's not a monarch, but he's 100% a melech l'halacha. Okay? In this case, melech is more aptly translated highest ruler, or something or other, ruler. Okay?
Rabbi.
Not this king in the sense of a monarch. Understand?
Absolute monarch.
Or an absolute monarch, but Yeshua was an absolute monarch. Sorry, he was absolute ruler. It says the Rambam says, based on the Gemara, that's the precedent. The people said, whoever rebels against your very word will be put to death. That's absolutism, right? That was given to Joshua. Was he a monarch? No. Did he have a crown? No. Okay. We have a series of shiurim about this, but the point is, stands. And it got even worse after Gideon died. My point is, let's get back to the outside point. We see that these states of affairs that existed at various times in the times of judges were all states of punishment and unacceptable. Okay? So in response to the fellows asking, maybe if we say we have to totally fight against our enemies, find a proper leader who will make things the way they're supposed to be. The Jewish people do not have to live in fear, and they could travel on the roads without fear of anything, and they don't have to pay foreign taxes to anybody, or any of these other terrible situations that we described for 8 years, 18 years, 7 years, 20 years in the times of judges. None of that is acceptable. And what God wants you to do is find a Gideon or a Yiftach or a Devorah or somebody and get you out of that situation. Make sense?
Rabbi.
So this was there. What was there a question?
Yes, maybe the mitzvot that they had in Gideon's time are like the mamads that we have now.
Yeah, I think I mentioned that. Did I say that? I wanted to make that clear. Yeah. The mamad, you have to hide in your safe room, right? Mamad is the safe room in the house. So
The thing that you said about the melech seems similar to Diuk the Gromix about the difference between a melech and a moshel.
yes, well, no, but they're the Gruz talking about by what right does he rule? Correct? It's like who
Yes,
chooses.
yeah, yeah.
So in proper Judaism, we have ones who are actually accepted by the people. All these leaders, whether you're a monarch like David or a functional king like Joshua or Gideon, you still have the backing of the people. You rule on the authority of the people and by permission of the people. Okay, they're all the good kinds in that distinction.
Yeah, well, that's what we
What?
try and wait. Oh, you have to wait for the ship.
Yeah, you have to wait for Mashiach. But and also the book of Judges teaches us, like we saw 2 weeks ago, the book of Judges teaches us that is entirely acceptable within Judaism and perhaps even desirable that even if the Messiah himself doesn't show up, we're not just supposed to take the punishment from the Goyim. We're supposed to do something. We're supposed to produce a leader who can get us out of trouble. We don't have to have a Messiah. We could have a judge. Okay? Sometimes the judge is a Shmuel Novi. Sometimes the judge is a Shimshon who doesn't even have the people backing him. Did Shimshon even get an army to help him? No, he had even turncoats. Judeans came and arrested him, tried to turn him over to the Philistines. Okay, so that's why I want to tell this fellow, you're worried you're going to become a Ben-Gvir. You're going, oh, I want to fight back, give it to the enemies. And he had a disputant who said, I don't care what it is, just hit them as hard as you can and forget about the consequences. Yes, that is what we learned from the book of Judges. None of this is acceptable. It's all a red line. There's no such thing as an acceptable amount of terror or missiles or anything like that. It should not be. You should know if we were living in a society where everybody was a good Jew, there'd be no crime, basically. Is there a reason for having policemen in our towns? Do the police do anything? Do they police anybody?
Well, I mean, there's a president of tomorrow says that there's men with sticks going around beating people, and
No.
we're out of line.
No. There are people who have the ability, they carry weapons and they enforce what the judges say. How often are they beating people? Our policemen carry guns. How often do Jewish policemen have to, in let's say a Jewish town like this or in Lakewood, have to take out their guns?
I find it very strange because I see out on the streets they only have guns. They don't have handcuffs, batons, spray.
Well, if you use your gun properly against someone you're trying to apprehend, you will not have to tase him or handcuff him afterwards.
Yeah, but the point is that they don't even have the equipment to do anything otherwise.
Zip ties.
They have zip ties sometimes. Okay, but that's not the point. The point is, they're not really prepared for anything either. Just to know.
So how do we get out of this cycle of bad leadership? How do we get to good leadership?
I'm looking at some youngsters. You need to empower the youngsters, and hopefully the current generation of people who are in charge will just disappear. And they're a bunch of marshmallows. Yeah, that's basically what it is. My generation, the marshmallow generation. Well, you're not a marshmallow, but you're the exception. Okay, I hope I'm not a marshmallow. I'm basically a marshmallow. I remember I came to Israel in Yom Ha'atzmaut 2008. The Rosh Hashiva brought over some older men for Memorial Day. The day before Independence Day is Memorial Day. The yeshiva stood at a historical spot along what used to be the Jerusalem seam line between what was then New Jerusalem and where the Jordanians took over, right? So you guys can see there are other remnants of such thing. Thank God it's mostly gone. So that seam line existed for some 19 years, since the state of Israel's independence until the Six-Day War. And these older men who came here were about 80 years old at the time. In 2007, they were basically 80. They had been 20-year-olds or so, or 19-year-olds during the War of Independence, and they were men from the neighborhood. This is in Beis Yisrael, near Mea Sharim. Back then, it wasn't just all Hasidish and Yeshivish, okay? What we'd call Haradite nowadays. There were people from Jerusalem, and these three older men came, and they came to lay a wreath and talk about how they defended that space. They were stationed there. A bunch of kids had to fend off Jordanians there. They held the line in 1948. They held the line, and two of their friends fell there. There's a plaque there that says it. Of the 5 guys who were there, 2 fell. So these 80-year-old men came back and discussed this. And for 2 hours, the most emotional, powerful Yom HaZikaron thing I've ever attended. And that was, whoa. And here's the ironic thing. The yeshiva there was basically an Or Sameach offshoot for guys who are a little bit more off the derech. Now, these guys back then, 18, 19-year-olds, they're not expected to wake up in the morning for chakras. That's on a good day. They're not expected to do anything. Many of them were just hoping they'll be in yeshiva long enough and they'll stop playing video games all day long and doing whatever else they do at night. and maybe they'll shape up. That's basically the point of yeshiva. Yeshivas like that used to be in Jerusalem. Are there still yeshivas like that? It's basically a rehab. There are very few of them. There are less of them, but they still exist, right? And I was looking around and thinking, well, and I'm what, 25 or whatever it is, 26 at the time, and I'm thinking these men are big and strong. They really had school of hard knocks. They had to fight for their lives, their city, and their country. They really grew up. They lived history. Some of them died history. And they're talking to their counterparts, 70 years younger, who never did anything in their lives. They began everything on a silver platter, and now they're stuck in Israel, basically on vacation playing video games. Why? Because they floated through high school doing nothing. They still haven't made themselves into anything. And if they had to suddenly defend this place from, an Amalekite or Ishmaelite onslaught, that's it. They'd be toast, or they'd be toasted marshmallows. So I was looking around. Yeah, these men are steel, and we're a bunch of marshmallows. Yeah, we need some difficult times to create strong men. So these difficult times will create strong men because the good times are too good, and we made too many weak men. So I want to tell this fellow that your fears of your boogeymen, your right wing extremists, and all that. Just to know if he had been around at Yiftach's times, what did it say about Yiftach? Let's read the last one. What happened before Yiftach? It got pretty bad before Gideon showed up. What happened with Yiftach? Anybody know? Come on, someone. None of you know the Bible by heart? What? Really?
Every now and then I get a flash.
I'm going to put it over here. Okay. You're a Gilead and Yiftach. There were two people called the Gileadites. Okay. Vayicharaf Hashem b'Yisrael, vayim kareim b'yad plishtim u'v'yad b'nei Ammon. In the west, they were delivered into the hands of the Plishtim, and the east, in the b'nei Ammon. The Plishtim would stick around because Yiftach couldn't get rid of them. Why Yiratzu, why Yirotetzu b'nei Yisrael b'shanahi? What is Yiratzu and Yirotetzu? Crushed them. Okay, just totally defeated them. That year, Shmonas Reishana, for the next 18 years, at Kol b'nei Yisrael asher be'ever dan be'eretz Hamori asher b'Gilad. All the Jews who were in the Aver Yarden, the place that had been conquered that used to be all of Aver Yarden was ruled by two Amorite kings. So they used to call that Eretz HaEmori, even though Jews had been living there now for 300 years. So anybody to the east of the Jordan River had a problem with this. Okay? Wayavru v'nei Ammon et HaYarden, l'ilchem gam Yudah u'V'Vinyamin u'Veit Ephraim. And then they crossed over the Jordan and started giving the tribes on the west side problems. That's Yehuda, Ephraim, and Binyamin. V'Teitzer l'Yisrael ma'od. So they really troubled them. So they went looking for a natural leader to guide them. So I want to say here that Teitzer Yisrael Me'od, once again, what does it mean? They thoroughly crushed them, and then they came over and they started causing a lot. Me'od. Much trouble for the Jewish people. So that's what we're getting now. So I want to tell this fellow, you're worried about, should we strike back? Do we have to totally defeat our enemies? I want to tell him that if you had been in Yiftach's time, you would have opposed him. Out of pragmatism, of course, but still you would have opposed the rise of any Jewish judge who wanted to say, you know what, enough is enough. No more compromising with this terror. And because some people, and here's what I think, the fellow who was writing this grew up in Haredi land. He writes about how totally by the book, straight Haredi guy in Chutz La'aretz. And then he realized that the Haredi education he got was sorely lacking many things, just essential things. The problem with Haredi Judaism is not that it involves Averos. If you want to stay away from Averos, go live in a very Haredi community. That's the best way to avoid Averos. However, you are not keeping the entire Torah. There's a lot of that which you need to move ahead to do. If you're stuck in Chutz La'aretz, you most likely are not going to have even an exposure to, I'm supposed to live in the land of Israel and keep more mitzvos. If you live in Haredi community here in Eretz Yisrael, you're not going to be exposed to, there's many more commandments that I could potentially keep, and perhaps God wants me to keep. That is the problem with Haredism. It is ignoring it. So whatever we do, this is what we're going to do. And the thought that we would do more, go beyond that which we already see, is forbidden. Right? That's general Haredi thing. So that's a problem. So that's why he grew out. He realized, I was being deprived in Haredi land. But the problem is he went to the opposite extreme. He became a complete statist, and everything that Yair Lapid and everybody says is 100%. That's the goal. He's in a different box, basically. He doesn't know that perhaps there is Tanakh. He's never studied Tanakh from, let's say, Tanakh al Pi Tanakh. Just know what the Tanakh says. That's not something that you get in Haredi land. And if you grow up and you do your PhD in your 20s and 30s, even though you escape that, now you know how to study Talmud, you can go your entire life. Look, these are mentioned. The Tanakh stories are, they add midrashim. You could read a lot about Yiftach and what happened to him, and his dealings with Pinchas, etc., and the rise of Eli Cohen. There's a lot of fine things in the Talmud, but the general lesson of what the book is actually trying to say is not something that is on the curriculum, and you won't get it from society either. That's a problem. And if, like I said, that's why I open this as saying I think we should oppose the study of Tanakh. Well, you know why? Because the study of Tanakh will have you realize that if you see Am Yisrael as being oppressed, there's somehow that they're being attacked on a regular basis, and there's certain roads, there are no-go zones in the land of Israel, right? Or whatever else we suffer on a regular basis at various times, that is completely unacceptable. And you'll want to do something about it. And that very idea is they call you messianic, or they'll use a bad word, they'll call you a kahanist or a right-winger, they'll call you a murderer of some sort, right? Yeah, that's a problem. But you're not a kahanist, you're just a regular Jew. So yeah, that's the situation.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.